Hey, tonight we're going to travel back in time to London in the year 1666. I'm going to tell you the story of one of the most devastating fires in history, the Great Fire of London. This is a tale of disaster, survival, and how an entire city had to rebuild itself from ashes. It's a story about real people who faced an unimaginable catastrophe, and how even in the darkest moments, humanity found ways to persevere. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, find a cozy spot, take a slow, deep breath, and let your body sink into comfort as we journey back in time together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in London, September 1666. The summer has been unusually hot and dry, with barely a drop of rain for months. The wooden buildings around you are parched and cracking in the heat. You can feel the warm breeze against your skin as you walk through the narrow streets of this bustling city. Good news, you're in one of the greatest cities in the world. London is enormous by 17th century standards, home to around 350,000 people, making it the third largest city in the Western world after Constantinople and Paris. The streets are alive with tradespeople, merchants, sailors and nobles. There's an energy here that pulses through the cramped streets and overhanging buildings. Bad news. This magnificent city is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The streets are incredibly narrow, often only wide enough for a single cart to pass. The buildings, mostly made of timber and covered with a flammable substance called pitch, lean toward each other. The upper floors jut out over the lower ones, a building technique called jettying, so that in some places you could almost reach out your window and touch the building across the street. You're staying in a neighbourhood near the Thames River, where the smell of fish and spices hangs in the air. It's Saturday evening, September 1st, and the city is winding down for the night. Candles flicker in windows as darkness settles. The wooden buildings creak in the wind, and you can hear snippets of conversation from open windows as families prepare for bed. As you walk, your boots sink slightly into the dirt and debris that cover the streets. You pass by Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane, a small but important establishment that supplies bread to the King's Navy. The smell of fresh bread lingers in the air as the baker and his family finish their day's work. Thomas checks his ovens one last time before heading upstairs to bed with his family, his daughter Hannah, his son, also named Thomas, and their maid. You continue your evening stroll, unaware that in just a few hours, London's fate will change forever. The night grows deeper. The city quiets. Most people are now asleep, dreaming peacefully in their beds. But inside the bakery on Pudding Lane, something has gone terribly wrong. Perhaps an ember from the oven has landed on a pile of fuel, or maybe a spark has caught in the dry timber. Whatever the cause, sometime around midnight, a small flame begins to grow. You're jolted awake by shouts in the street. Your room feels unusually warm and there's a strange orange glow coming through your window. The air tastes of smoke. It's now around 1 a.m. on Sunday, September 2nd, and when you look outside, you see flames licking up the side of the bakery. Thomas Farriner and his family have woken to find their home ablaze. The fire has spread rapidly through the ground floor, blocking their exit down the stairs. In desperation, they climb out of an upstairs window onto their neighbour's roof. The maid, too frightened to follow, becomes the fire's first victim. You rush outside to find the street in chaos. Neighbours are forming bucket chains, passing water from hand to throw on the flames, but the fire is growing faster than they can douse it. The wooden buildings, dried out from the summer heat, catch like paper. The flames dance from house to house, gaining strength. As you stand there, mesmerised by the growing inferno, you feel a hand grab your arm. It's a local watchman, his face streaked with soot. "Don't just stand there," he shouts over the roar of the fire. "Either help or get away while you can." You can feel the heat on your face, the sweat beading on your forehead. The decision seems simple enough: stay and fight a losing battle, or flee to safety. But where would you go? This is London, a maze of timber houses and narrow alleys, all of it now in the path of a growing monster. Nearby, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, the Lord Mayor of London, has finally arrived on the scene. People turn to him for leadership, for decisive action, but he seems overwhelmed by the situation. When someone suggests pulling down houses to create a firebreak, the standard practice for preventing fires from spreading, he hesitates. "Pish," he says dismissively, looking at the flames. "A woman might piss it out." His words will come back to haunt him. The Lord Mayor returns to his bed, convinced the fire will burn itself out by morning. He couldn't be more wrong. By dawn, the fire has spread beyond Pudding Lane, consuming buildings at an alarming rate. The strong east wind fans the flames, pushing them westward through the city. The narrow streets act like chimneys, intensifying the heat and drawing the fire forward. As the sky lightens, you can see that dozens of houses are already burning. People are now pouring into the streets, carrying whatever possessions they can salvage. Some load their belongings onto carts, while others drag heavy furniture by hand. Many rush toward the river, hoping to escape by boat. The wealthier citizens hire carts at extortionate prices. What would normally cost a shilling now costs 10 or 20. You make your way to the Thames, where boats of all sizes are being loaded with people and possessions. The water offers a strange mirror to the chaos, reflecting the orange glow of the burning city. From here you can see sparks carried on the wind, landing on buildings and igniting new fires far from the original blaze. One of the most shocking sights is the burning of the warehouses along the riverfront. These massive structures are filled with flammable goods: oil, tallow, coal, spirits, and more. When the flames reach them, they don't just burn, they explode in spectacular bursts of fire that light up the sky and send burning debris flying in all directions. The people around you are a mix of shocked silence and panicked cries. A woman clutches a small portrait to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she watches her home disappear in the flames. A merchant shouts orders as his apprentices load crates onto a barge. Children cling to their parents, wide-eyed with fear. Among the crowd, you notice a well-dressed man making careful observations of the fire. This is Samuel Pepys, a clerk of the Privy Seal and a keen diarist. He's been watching the fire since early morning, at first thinking it not serious enough to worry about. Now, seeing the scale of the disaster, he's on his way to Whitehall Palace to inform King Charles II. The day wears on and the fire grows ever larger. Church bells ring out warnings across the city, their urgent peals creating an eerie soundtrack to the disaster. By afternoon, the fire has reached the heart of London's commercial district, threatening the livelihood of countless merchants and tradespeople. You've managed to secure a spot on a small boat heading upriver, away from the flames. As you pull away from the shore, you look back at the city. The smoke is so thick now that it blocks out the sun, creating an artificial twilight. The flames reach higher than the church steeples, painting the smoke orange and red. The noise is overwhelming. The roar of the fire, the crash of collapsing buildings, the shouts and cries of thousands of Londoners. From your vantage point on the water, you see something that sends a chill down your spine despite the heat. The fire has reached London Bridge, the only bridge across the Thames. The structure is lined with houses and shops, packed tightly together. If the bridge burns, the fire could cross to the south bank, doubling the potential disaster. But there's a strange stroke of luck here. Part of London Bridge had been destroyed in a fire 30 years earlier, in 1633. The gap created then now serves as a firebreak, preventing the flames from crossing to the south side of the river. It's a small mercy in an otherwise merciless day. As night falls on Sunday, the city is a hellscape of flame and smoke. The fire shows no sign of slowing. If anything, it's gaining strength. You've found temporary shelter in a field outside the city walls, joining thousands of other displaced Londoners. The ground is hard beneath you, but exhaustion wins out over discomfort, and you fall into a troubled sleep under a sky lit orange by the burning city. Monday morning brings no relief. The fire has continued to spread overnight and the wind remains strong from the east. From your position outside the city, you can see that the fire now extends over a mile from east to west. The smoke is visible for miles around, and reports say it can be seen as far away as Oxford. You decide to venture back toward the city, staying at a safe distance. The heat is intense, even from hundreds of yards away. The air is thick with ash and embers, making it difficult to breathe. Your eyes sting and your throat feels raw. As you watch, you see a group of men working furiously to pull down a row of houses in the fire's path. They're using long hooks and ropes, straining to create a gap wide enough to stop the flames. This is what should have been done immediately, but now it may be too late. The fire is moving too quickly, jumping over gaps and igniting buildings through sheer heat and flying embers. Among the crowd, you spot a familiar face. It's Robert Weiner, one of the wealthiest goldsmiths and bankers in London. His mansion on Lombard Street is directly in the path of the fire. Despite his wealth and status, he looks as frightened as anyone else. He's directing a team of servants who are loading chests onto carts, likely containing his gold, silver, and important documents. 24 hours, he mutters as you pass. That's all the time I have before it reaches my home. You nod sympathetically. Where will you go? Windsor Castle, he says, surprising you. The king has granted me permission to store my valuables there. He manages a grim smile. It pays to have powerful friends in times like these. As Weiner returns to his preparations, you continue your journey around the perimeter of the fire. The scene is the same everywhere. People fleeing, carrying what they can, faces streaked with soot and tears. The city that just 2 days ago was a thriving metropolis is now being emptied of its inhabitants. By Monday afternoon, the fire has reached the financial heart of London. The Royal Exchange, where merchants conduct business from all over the world, is engulfed in flames. The massive stone columns that front the building glow red with heat before cracking and collapsing. Inside, the shops that sell luxury goods from across the globe become fuel for the insatiable fire. As evening approaches, you find yourself near the Tower of London, the ancient fortress that has stood for centuries. Soldiers are frantically creating fire breaks around it, determined to save this symbol of royal power. Inside, they're moving gunpowder stores to safer locations. If the fire reaches the tower's ammunition, the resulting explosion could devastate what remains of the eastern city. You spend another night under the stars, this time on a small hill that gives you a view of the burning city. London is transformed into a sea of flame, with occasional taller bursts marking the collapse of a larger building. The orange glow lights up the faces of the refugees around you, casting long shadows behind them. There's a strange beauty to it, terrible and awesome at the same time. You overhear snippets of conversation as people try to make sense of the disaster. Some blame foreign agents or Catholic plotters. Others see it as God's judgment on a sinful city. Many simply weep for their lost homes and livelihoods. An old man sits nearby, warming his hands by a small campfire, a controlled flame in sight of the uncontrolled inferno. He catches your eye and beckons you closer. "I've lived in London all my life," he says, his voice rough with age and smoke. 73 years I've been here, through plague and war and every manner of trouble, but I never thought I'd see the city burn. He offers you a piece of bread, which you accept gratefully. Your stomach has been too knotted with anxiety to feel hunger, but now you realize you haven't eaten all day. "What will happen now?" you ask him, chewing slowly. He shrugs, his shoulders bony beneath his thin shirt. "We rebuild. What else can we do? London has burned before, though never like this. It will rise again." He stares into the distance, at the glow of the burning city. "But it won't be the same. The London I knew is turning to ash before our eyes." As he speaks, you notice movement at the edge of the refugee camp. A group of soldiers has arrived, led by a man with an air of authority. It's the Duke of York, the king's brother, come to assess the situation and coordinate firefighting efforts. Unlike the hesitant Lord Mayor, the Duke takes immediate action, ordering buildings demolished to create wider fire breaks. Tuesday dawns, and the fire has been raging for more than 48 hours. The wind still blows from the east, driving the flames deeper into the city's western districts. The fire has now consumed much of the commercial heart of London and is threatening its spiritual centre, the great Cathedral of St. Paul's. You decide to move closer to the cathedral, drawn by some impulse to witness what happens to this magnificent building that has dominated London's skyline for centuries. The streets are nearly unrecognisable. Where houses once stood, there are now just smouldering ruins. The ground beneath your feet is hot, and in some places you can see that the cobblestones themselves are glowing with heat. As you approach St. Paul's, you see a curious sight. The churchyard around the cathedral is filled with books and papers, stacks and stacks of them piled haphazardly between the graves. You soon learn that booksellers from nearby shops have brought their inventory here for safety, believing the stone cathedral will withstand the fire where their wooden shops could not. Among them is Joshua Curtin, a well-established bookseller whose shop near the cathedral has been in business for many years. He's directing his apprentices as they carry armloads of books into the crypt beneath the cathedral. The stone walls will protect them, he explains, when he sees you watching. St. Paul's has stood for centuries. It won't fall to this fire. But even as he speaks, you can see doubt in his eyes. The fire is closer now, and the heat is becoming unbearable. The air shimmers with it, making the streets beyond the churchyard waver like a mirage. You help Curtin carry a few more loads of books into the crypt, then retreat to a safer distance. By midday, the fire has reached the cathedral. What happens next defies belief. The massive stone building, far from being immune to the flames, seems to feed them. The wooden scaffolding around the cathedral, erected for repairs, catches fire first. Then, to everyone's horror, the lead roof begins to melt, pouring down the sides of the building like silver tears. The heat inside St. Paul's becomes so intense that the stones themselves begin to explode, shooting outward like cannonballs. The noise is deafening, part roar, part crack, part scream, and then, with a sound that seems to shake the very ground, the roof collapses inward, taking with it centuries of history. In the crypt below, Joshua Curtin's books are now fuel for the inferno. His life's work and investments are reduced to ash in minutes. When you see him later, standing at a safe distance, watching the cathedral burn, his face is blank with shock. "Everything," he whispers. "Everything is gone." You place a hand on his shoulder, feeling the slight tremor that runs through his body. There are no words that seem adequate for such a loss, so you simply stand with him in silence, watching as one of London's greatest landmarks is devoured by flame. The fire continues its relentless march westward, swallowing everything in its path. By Tuesday evening, it threatens to reach Westminster, where the Royal Palace and Parliament stand. If these symbols of government fall, the psychological blow to the nation could be as devastating as the physical destruction of the city. As darkness falls on the third day of the fire, you find yourself near Moorfields, a large open space north of the city walls. Thousands of refugees have gathered here, creating a makeshift settlement of tents and lean-tos. Families huddle together, sharing what little food they've managed to salvage. The mood is somber, but there's also a strange sense of community forming. Strangers helping strangers, sharing resources and comfort. You settle down for another night under the open sky, your body aching with fatigue, your clothes stiff with dried sweat and ash. The glow of the burning city lights the clouds from below, creating an eerie false dawn that makes it difficult to sleep. Around you, children whimper and adults speak in hushed tones, trying to plan for a future that suddenly seems very uncertain. As you drift into an uneasy sleep, you wonder what tomorrow will bring. Will the fire finally be contained, or will it continue until nothing is left of this once great city? And even if the flames are stopped, how will London and its people ever recover from such devastation? The answer to these questions will come with the morning light as the Great Fire of London enters its fourth day and the fight to save what remains of the city reaches its climax. The dawn of Wednesday, September 5th, breaks with an unusual glow. The sun struggles to penetrate the thick pall of smoke hanging over what remains of London. You've barely slept, your body tense with anxiety, your lungs roar from breathing smoke-filled air. As you rise and brush the dirt from your clothes, you notice something different. The wind has changed. For 3 days, the strong easterly wind has driven the fire relentlessly westward through the heart of the city. But now, on this fourth morning, the wind has shifted to the north, then weakened considerably. This simple change in weather might be what saves what's left of London. You make your way toward the burning city once more, drawn by a need to witness this historic catastrophe. The streets are filled with ash that swirls around your ankles with each step. The heat still radiates from the ground, warming the soles of your boots. In some places, the cobblestones themselves are hot enough to burn skin. As you approach what was once the western edge of the fire, you see something remarkable. Teams of men are working with grim determination, not just pulling down houses with hooks and ropes as before, but actually blowing them up. Barrels of gunpowder are being strategically placed in buildings, then detonated to create wide gaps that the fire cannot jump across. This desperate measure is being directed by the king's brother, James, Duke of York. Unlike the indecisive Lord Mayor, the Duke has taken command with military precision. The navy, which had been using gunpowder, is now carrying out his orders, creating controlled destruction to prevent further devastation. "Stand back," comes a shout, and you retreat just as another explosion rocks the ground beneath your feet. A building collapses in a cloud of dust and debris, adding to the apocalyptic scene. But the strategy is working. Without the wind to carry embers across these new gaps, the fire struggles to find new fuel. You notice a small crowd gathered around a well-dressed man who's directing some of the operations. It's King Charles II himself who has come to oversee the firefighting efforts. Unlike many monarchs who might flee to safety, Charles has remained in London, even helping to pass buckets of water and encouraging his subjects. "The king himself, getting his hands dirty alongside common folk," murmurs a woman beside you, her voice filled with wonder. "Never thought I'd see the day." It's true, there's something powerful about seeing the monarch working shoulder to shoulder with sailors, labourers and merchants to save what remains of the city. Charles looks exhausted, his fine clothes stained with soot, but his presence brings a surge of hope to the weary firefighters. By mid-morning, it's clear that the tide is turning. The fire still burns fiercely in many areas, but its advance has been checked. For the first time since Sunday, people dare to believe that the destruction might finally be halted. You make your way toward the Tower of London, curious to see if this ancient fortress has survived. The tower has stood for centuries as a symbol of royal power, serving as palace, prison, mint and armoury. More importantly, it houses a vast store of gunpowder, enough to devastate what remains of the eastern city if ignited. As you approach, you see that the firefighters have succeeded in protecting the tower. By demolishing nearby buildings and creating a wide space around the fortress, they've managed to keep the flames at bay. Soldiers stand guard, their faces grim but relieved. Near the tower, you encounter a familiar face, Robert Weiner, the wealthy goldsmith and banker whose mansion on Lombard Street you'd seen being evacuated 2 days earlier. He looks haggard, his fine clothes rumpled from sleeping rough, but there's a calculating intelligence in his eyes as he surveys the devastation. "My house is gone," he tells you without preamble when he recognizes you. "My business, my workshop, all of it, burned to the ground. I'm sorry, you say, the words feeling inadequate against such loss. Weiner shrugs. The gold and silver I sent to Windsor, and my account books too. I can rebuild. He glances at you appraisingly. Many others cannot say the same. What will you do now? You ask. Start again, he says simply. London will need bankers more than ever as it rebuilds. There's profit to be made in disaster for those with the capital to invest. He seems to catch himself, adding, and a duty to help restore what's been lost, of course. As Weiner takes his leave, promising to remember your face should you ever need financial services, you continue your journey through the smouldering ruins. The devastation is complete in many areas. Where grand buildings and humble homes once stood, there are now just blackened foundations and crumbling chimneys rising from the ash like the gravestones of a city. You pass by what was once the Royal Exchange, the commercial heart of London. Now it's just a skeleton of stone, its interior completely gutted by the flames. Nearby, the Guildhall, seat of city government for centuries, stands partially intact, its thick stone walls having resisted complete destruction. But its roof is gone, and the interior is a charred shell. As you walk, you notice people beginning to return to the edges of the burned area, poking through the ruins with sticks or bare hands, searching for anything that might have survived. A woman kneels in what must have been her kitchen, carefully lifting a blackened pot from the ashes. A man stands motionless in the footprint of his shop, seemingly unable to comprehend the totality of his loss. The human cost of the fire becomes more evident with each passing hour. While the death toll remains mercifully low, the fire spreads slowly enough that most people could flee. The displacement is catastrophic. Close to 100,000 Londoners are now homeless, camping in fields outside the city, or seeking shelter with friends or relatives in unburned areas. By afternoon, you've made your way to Christ's Hospital School, where you'd heard the shoemaker Sybil Tame had her workshop. The school itself has mostly survived, being on the northern edge of the fire, but several of the outbuildings where tradespeople worked have been damaged or destroyed. You find Sybil sitting on a low wall surrounded by 3 young girls, her daughters. She's a sturdy woman with capable hands and a determined set to her jaw. Despite the disaster, she's already working, her fingers busy with a piece of leather as she talks with another woman. No choice but to start over, she's saying as you approach. The tools I managed to save, thank God, but everything else. She shakes her head, then notices you hovering nearby. You looking for shoes? I'm afraid you'll have a long wait. Lost my whole stock in the fire. Just passing by, you explain, seeing how people are faring. Sybil's expression softens slightly. As well as can be expected, my workshop's gone, but the school's letting us stay in one of the dormitories for now. She nods toward her daughters. These 3 need feeding, fire or no fire, so I'll find a way to keep working. The school will need shoes for the orphans, adds the woman beside her. They'll have you back making them before long, though they may grumble about the price of leather after this. Sybil laughs, a surprisingly hearty sound amid so much destruction. Let them grumble. They know I'm the best shoemaker they'll find, and I've never been shy about knowing my worth. There's something inspiring about her practical resilience. While others might be paralysed by the scale of the disaster, Sybil is already planning how to rebuild her life, one stitch at a time. As evening approaches on this 4th day of the fire, the immediate danger seems to be passing. The combination of fire breaks, changing wind, and exhaustive firefighting efforts has finally contained the worst of the blaze, but London still smoulders and will continue to do so for days or even weeks. The ground is too hot to walk on in many areas, and small fires continue to break out as embers find new fuel. You find a relatively comfortable spot on a hillside overlooking the burned city, joining hundreds of other displaced Londoners in what has become an impromptu refugee camp. As darkness falls, the glow of the city is still visible, though less intense than on previous nights. The silhouettes of half-destroyed buildings create a jagged skyline against the orange sky. Around campfires, people share what food they've managed to salvage or purchase. The mood is subdued, but not entirely hopeless. Londoners are already talking about rebuilding, about what the new city might look like, about how to create something better from the ashes of the old. But there's another conversation happening too, one darker and more dangerous. People are looking for someone to blame. "It's the Dutch," insists a merchant near your campfire. "We're at war with them, aren't we? Their ships couldn't defeat us at sea, so they sent agents to burn us from within." "Nonsense," counters an older woman. "It's the Catholics. They've been plotting against good Protestants since Queen Mary's day." "I heard it was the French," adds another voice from the shadows. These whispers of conspiracy spread through the camps like another kind of fire, feeding on fear and uncertainty. The human need to find meaning in disaster, to identify an enemy rather than accept terrible coincidence, is powerful. You listen but say nothing, remembering how the fire actually began in a baker's oven on Pudding Lane through simple carelessness rather than malice. As the night deepens, exhaustion finally overcomes anxiety, and you drift into sleep beneath the open sky, the glow of the smouldering city your only light. Thursday morning brings clearer skies, the smoke finally beginning to dissipate as the remaining fires burn themselves out. The immediate crisis has passed, but the aftermath is just beginning. London faces the monumental task of burying its dead, housing its displaced, and eventually rebuilding what has been lost. You decide to venture deeper into the burned area, curious to see the full extent of the destruction in daylight. The scene is apocalyptic. From the Tower in the east to Fleet Street in the west, from the Thames in the south to the City Wall in the north, London has been gutted. Over 400 acres, 4/5 of the area within the city walls, has been reduced to ash and rubble. The statistics are almost impossible to comprehend. 13,200 houses destroyed, 87 parish churches burned to the ground, most of the city's governmental and commercial buildings gone. Everywhere you look, chimneys stand like lonely sentinels above fields of debris. Occasionally you spot the melted remnants of a church bell or the twisted metal of what was once a shop sign. The sound of hammering draws your attention. Already, some Londoners are erecting temporary shelters amid the ruins, driving posts into the still warm ground and stretching canvas over them. Others are setting up makeshift stalls to sell food, drink, or salvage goods. London may be down, but its commercial spirit is far from dead. Near what was once St Paul's Cathedral, you encounter Joshua Curtin again, the bookseller whose stock was destroyed when the cathedral burned. He's poking through the rubble with a long stick, occasionally stopping to examine something more closely. "Looking for anything in particular?" you ask, approaching carefully so as not to startle him. He looks up, recognition dawning slowly on his ash-streaked face. "Oh, it's you, the one who helped with the books." He gestures vaguely at the ruins of the cathedral. "Not that it did any good in the end." "I'm sorry about your books," you say. He nods absently, returning to his search. Some had metal clasps or decorations. Silver, a few even gold. Might be something left of them, at least. His voice is flat, emotionless, as though he's retreated somewhere inside himself. You help him search for a while, but find nothing of value. The fire that consumed St. Paul's was hot enough to melt lead. Any precious metals would have suffered the same fate. Eventually, Curtin straightens up, wincing as his back protests. "It's no use," he says, finally allowing some emotion to creep into his voice. "It's all gone. 30 years of collecting, of building my business." He trails off, staring at the ruins. "What will you do now?" you ask, echoing the question you asked the goldsmith Weiner. Unlike Weiner, Curtin has no ready answer. "I don't know," he admits. Start again, I suppose, though I haven't the capital that some do. Perhaps I'll leave London altogether. They say Oxford is pleasant, and they value books there. As you part ways with Curtin, you can't help but reflect on the different ways people respond to catastrophe. Some, like Sybil Tame, face it with practical determination. Others, like Robert Weiner, look for opportunity amid the chaos. And some, like Joshua Curtin, seem lost, unmoored by the sudden destruction of everything familiar. You continue your exploration of the ruined city, eventually finding yourself near the bakery on Pudding Lane where it all began. There's nothing left of it now, just a blackened patch of earth indistinguishable from the surrounding devastation. It seems impossible that such complete destruction could have started from a single spark, yet the evidence is all around you. As you stand there, contemplating the power of fire and the fragility of human construction, you overhear a heated conversation nearby. A group of men are questioning someone. From their uniforms, they appear to be constables or watchmen, and the person they're interrogating looks foreign, perhaps French. "Admit it," one of the constables is saying, his face red with anger. "You and your Catholic friends planned this. You wanted to destroy our Protestant city." The foreigner is protesting his innocence, his accented English becoming more fractured as his panic rises. No, I arrive only yesterday. I know nothing of fire." You hesitate, torn between walking away from an ugly scene and intervening in what appears to be a grave injustice. Before you can decide, someone else steps in, a well-dressed gentleman with an air of authority. "That's enough," he says firmly to the constables. "This man was nowhere near London when the fire began. I've seen his ship's records myself." The constables back down reluctantly, muttering among themselves as they leave. The gentleman helps the shaken foreigner to his feet. "Thank you, sir," the man says, his voice trembling. "They say all foreigners are to blame. It is not safe for me here." "Get yourself to Southwark," the gentleman advises him. "There are others from your country there, and the fire didn't cross the river." He presses a few coins into the man's hand. "Go quickly, and stay out of sight until this madness passes." As the foreigner hurries away, you approach the gentleman, curious about his intervention. "That was kind of you," you remark. He gives you a measuring look. "It was just. The fire was an accident begun in a baker's oven. I've spoken with the baker himself and his family, but people want someone to blame, especially if that someone is different from themselves." He sighs. "I fear this won't be the last false accusation we see in the coming days." "You seem very certain about how the fire started," you observe. "I investigated it personally," he says. "I'm Robert Brooke, a Member of Parliament. The King has asked me to chair a committee looking into the cause of the fire." He grimaces, "though I suspect many won't believe our findings if they don't confirm their prejudices." As Sir Robert continues on his way, you ponder the human tendency to seek scapegoats in times of crisis. The Great Fire was a terrible accident, made worse by dry conditions, poor building practices, and initial hesitation in response, but already a different narrative is forming. One of foreign plots and Catholic conspiracies, of unseen enemies seeking to destroy the Protestant city. By evening, you've made your way back to the refugee camp outside the city walls. The mood has shifted subtly since yesterday. With the immediate danger past, people are beginning to think about the future. Some are making plans to leave London altogether, seeking new lives in other towns or even abroad. Others are determined to stay and rebuild, already discussing how they might obtain materials and where they might find temporary housing in the meantime. King Charles II has issued a proclamation read aloud by heralds throughout the camps. He declares that October 10th will be a day of fasting in penance for the fire and urges the Lord Mayor to support collections for the victims. More significantly, he promises that London will rise again, better than before. You find a quiet spot on the edge of the camp and watch as the sun sets over the ruined city. The silhouette of London is forever changed, the familiar spires and towers gone, replaced by an irregular skyline of partial walls and lonely chimneys. Yet even in this moment of utter devastation, there's a strange beauty to the scene, a reminder of nature's power and humanity's resilience. A woman sits down beside you, offering a piece of bread. You recognize her as one of Sybil Tame's neighbours from Christ's Hospital. "They're saying the king will rebuild the whole city in stone," she says, gazing at the ruins. "No more wooden houses to burn. That would be wise, you agree? Though I wonder how long it will take." She shrugs. "Years, surely. But what choice do we have? London is still London, even without its buildings." She gestures toward the camps where thousands of people are settling in for another night under the stars. The city isn't the stone and timber, it's the people. As darkness falls completely, small fires spring up throughout the camp, controlled flames for cooking and warmth, a stark contrast to the destructive inferno that raged through the city. Around these fires, Londoners gather to share food, stories and comfort. Children who were terrified just days ago now play chase between the makeshift tents. A man produces a fiddle somehow saved from the flames, and soon music fills the air. You find yourself drawn to one particular group where an old man is telling stories of the last great fire to hit London back in 1212. His audience listens raptly as he describes how the city rebuilt itself then, how new life sprouted from the ashes. "London has burned before," he concludes, "and each time it has come back stronger. This time will be no different." As you settle down for the night, wrapped in a borrowed blanket beneath the vast starry sky, you reflect on what you've witnessed. The Great Fire of London has been a catastrophe of unprecedented scale, destroying in days what took centuries to build. The road to recovery will be long and difficult, with countless challenges ahead. Yet there's also opportunity in this destruction, a chance to reimagine and rebuild a city that had grown organically and chaotically over centuries. The narrow streets that helped spread the fire might be widened. The crowded wooden tenements could be replaced with safer stone structures. Perhaps London will emerge from this disaster as a more beautiful, more functional, more resilient city than before. As sleep begins to claim you, your last thoughts are of the people you've met. Sybil Tame with her practical determination, Robert Weiner calculating new opportunities, Joshua Curtin facing an uncertain future. Each represents a different response to disaster, a different path forward. And each in their own way embodies the spirit that will eventually rebuild London from its ashes. Your breathing deepens, your muscles relax, and you drift into sleep beneath the same stars that have witnessed London's long history, its triumphs and tragedies, its destructions and rebirths. The Great Fire may have changed the face of the city forever, but London endures, as it always has, as it always will. Friday morning dawns clear and bright, a week since the fire first began. The smoke has mostly cleared, though the scent of burning still hangs in the air like a persistent ghost. You've spent several nights sleeping under the open sky, your body growing accustomed to the hard ground and the sounds of thousands of displaced Londoners breathing, shifting, occasionally crying out in their sleep. Today, you decide to venture back into the heart of the devastation. The ground is cooler now, though still warm in places where deeper fires continue to smoulder. As you walk through what was once the bustling centre of London, the scale of rebuilding required becomes even more apparent. For a mile in every direction, the city is gone, replaced by a lunar landscape of ash and stone. Here and there, work has already begun. Teams of men clear debris from the streets, piling it into carts to be hauled away. Others mark out property boundaries with stakes and string, trying to determine where one building ended and another began in the featureless expanse of ruins. Surveyors with instruments and notebooks make careful measurements and sketches, preparing for what will surely be a complex rebuilding process. Near what was once Cheapside, London's most fashionable shopping street, you notice a flurry of activity. A group of well-dressed men surrounds someone who appears to be giving directions. As you draw closer, you realise that it's King Charles II himself, accompanied by several architects and city officials. "The streets must be wider," the king is saying, gesturing broadly. This crowding of buildings upon buildings is what allowed the fire to spread so quickly. We have an opportunity now to create a city worthy of our nation's greatness. One of the men with him nods enthusiastically. You recognise him as Christopher Wren, already known as a promising architect and mathematician, despite being only in his 30s. "Indeed, Your Majesty, I envision broad avenues radiating from central points, with buildings of uniform height and appearance. We might create a London to rival Paris in elegance and Rome in grandeur." Another man, John Evelyn, you think his name is, unrolls a large parchment revealing an intricate plan for a completely redesigned city. "The streets should be straight and regular," he explains, "with buildings of brick or stone throughout. We must leave the medieval city behind and embrace classical principles of order and harmony." The king studies the plans with evident interest, occasionally asking questions or suggesting modifications. It's clear that he sees the fire, for all its devastation, as an opportunity to transform London into a truly modern capital. As the royal party moves on, you notice ordinary Londoners watching from a distance, their expressions ranging from hope to skepticism. For the wealthy and powerful, the fire represents a chance to reimagine the city according to new ideals of beauty and function. But for those who have lost everything, the immediate concern is much simpler: how to survive until rebuilding can begin. You continue your exploration, eventually finding yourself near the banks of the Thames. The riverfront was particularly hard hit by the fire, with warehouses full of flammable goods creating some of the most intense blazes. Now, the wharves are busy again, though not with their usual commerce. Boats arrive constantly, bringing supplies for the thousands of displaced people: food, blankets, tents, and building materials. Among the boats, you spot one being unloaded with particular care. Men in the livery of the king's household oversee the transfer of crates and barrels to waiting carts. Curious, you approach one of the workers. "What's all this?" you ask, gesturing to the supplies. "King's Relief," the man answers, wiping sweat from his brow. "Food and necessities for those made homeless by the fire. His Majesty has ordered distributions throughout the camps." It's a reminder that for all his grand visions of a new London, Charles hasn't forgotten the immediate needs of his subjects. The king seems determined to show a different face than he did during the plague the previous year, when he and his court fled the city for the safety of Oxford. As midday approaches, your stomach reminds you that you haven't eaten since yesterday. You follow the smell of cooking to a makeshift market that has sprung up at the edge of the burned area. Here, farmers from the surrounding countryside sell their produce to the displaced population, while enterprising cooks offer hot meals from steaming pots. You purchase a bowl of pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and barley, from a woman whose cooking fire is little more than a few stones arranged around burning sticks. The food is simple but filling, warming your insides as you sit on an overturned bucket to eat. Around you, the conversation centres on one topic: rebuilding. A group of carpenters discusses the likely price of timber in the coming months. Astronomical, they agree, with so much demand. Two masons argue about the best type of stone for new construction, while a chandler wonders aloud where he'll find the capital to restart his candle-making business. They say the king's establishing special courts, mentions a well-dressed merchant at a nearby table, to settle disputes between landlords and tenants about who's responsible for rebuilding. "About time," grumbles his companion. "My lease says I'm obliged to return the property in the same condition, but how can anyone expect that after such a fire? It would ruin me to rebuild from scratch." "That's just it," the first man nods. "These new fire courts will decide based on who has the means to rebuild. If the tenant can't afford it, the responsibility falls to the landlord." This conversation piques your interest. The legal implications of the fire are enormous, with thousands of leases and contracts thrown into confusion by the destruction. Without clear guidance, rebuilding could be delayed for years while courts sort through endless litigation. After finishing your meal, you decide to seek out Robert Weiner, the wealthy goldsmith and banker you'd encountered earlier. As one of London's financial elite, he might have insights into how the city's economy will recover. You find him not in the refugee camps, but already back in the burned district, standing amid the ruins of what must have been his mansion on Lombard Street. He's accompanied by several men who appear to be architects or builders, all gesturing and pointing as they discuss something. When Weiner notices you approaching, he breaks away from the group with a nod of recognition. "Ah, my friend from the fire, come to see how the mighty have fallen?" There's no bitterness in his tone, only a kind of wry amusement. "Just curious about what happens next," you admit. "For you and for London." Weiner surveys the ruins of his home thoughtfully. "What happens next is that we rebuild, of course, better than before." He gestures to the men he was speaking with. "I've already commissioned plans for a new house and business premises, stone naturally, with proper fireproofing throughout." "You don't waste time," you observe. "In finance, hesitation is fatal," he says with a slight smile. "The same applies here. Those who rebuild quickly will prosper in the new London. Those who wait..." He shrugs. "They may find themselves left behind." "And the banking business? Will that recover?" Weiner's expression grows more serious. "That's the greater concern. London was the financial heart of England, with the Royal Exchange destroyed, with so many merchants ruined. Yes, there will be disruption, but money, like water, finds its level. Already temporary exchanges are being established, trade continues, loans are still made, interest still accrues." He glances back at his ruined mansion. "I lost a house, but my fortune remains intact. My records were saved, my gold secured. Not everyone was so fortunate or so foresighted." There's something both impressive and slightly chilling about Weiner's composure. While others are still reeling from the disaster, he's already positioning himself to thrive in its aftermath. You wonder how many others among London's elite share his cool calculation, and how many have been financially ruined by the fire. As afternoon stretches toward evening, you make your way back toward Christ's Hospital, curious to see how Sybil Tame and her daughters are faring. The school complex is busier than before, with workers clearing debris and making repairs to the damaged sections. You find Sybil not in the dormitory where she was staying, but in a small courtyard where she set up an impromptu workshop. A plank balanced between two barrels serves as her workbench, and she's busy cutting leather with a sharp knife, her movements precise and practiced. "Back again?" she asks without looking up when your shadow falls across her work. "Seems you've taken an interest in us fire victims." "Just trying to understand how people go on after something like this," you say. Sybil sets down her knife and straightens, pressing her hands against the small of her back. "Same as we go on after anything else, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time." She gestures to the leather she's cutting. "Schools commissioned me to make new shoes for 20 orphans." It's a start. "Where are your daughters?" you ask, noticing the absence of the 3 girls who had been with her before. "The oldest 2 are helping in the kitchen, earning our keep. The little one's with the school nurse, learning her letters." Sybil's expression softens slightly. "That's one good thing come of this at least. They're getting schooling they wouldn't have had otherwise." You notice that Sybil's hands, though skilled with leather and all, are reddened and chapped. "You've been doing other work as well?" You guess. She nods. Laundry, mostly. School has hundreds of children, and children make messes. There's always washing to be done. She flexes her fingers, wincing slightly. It's not what I'm trained for, but it puts food on the table until I can get the shoemaking business properly re-established. Sybil's practical resilience continues to impress you. Unlike Reiner with his financial resources, or even Curtin with his specialized knowledge, she has only her hands and her determination to rely on. Yet she seems the most adaptable of the three, willing to do whatever is necessary to provide for her family. Have you heard about the fire courts, you ask, remembering the conversation from the market, for settling disputes about rebuilding? Sybil snorts. Courts are for people with property. My workshop was rented and barely that. More an arrangement with the school than a proper lease. She picks up her knife again, testing the edge with her thumb. No, I'll not be troubling any courts. I'll make my own way, same as always. As you take your leave of Sybil, promising to check on her again in a few days, you reflect on the different phases of recovery emerging from the disaster. For the wealthy like Reiner, it's about preserving capital and seizing new opportunities. For the poorest, it's simply about survival from day to day. And for those in between, the craftspeople, shopkeepers and small merchants who formed London's middle ranks, the path forward is less clear, dependent on factors beyond their control. The sun is beginning to set as you make your way back toward the refugee camp that has been your temporary home. The sky above London glows orange and pink, the dust and remaining smoke in the air creating a spectacular sunset. It's beautiful in its way, though the beauty is born of destruction. As darkness falls, you notice something unusual. A group of people gathering around a man standing on an overturned cart. He's reading aloud from a document, his voice carrying across the quiet camp. Curious, you move closer to listen. And whereas by this calamitous fire many disputes may arise between landlords and tenants, His Majesty has decreed the establishment of a special fire court comprised of justices of the King's Bench and Common Pleas to hear and determine all such differences. It's a royal proclamation, you realise, outlining the formation of the courts you'd heard discussed earlier. The document goes on to explain that cases will be heard and verdicts typically given within a day to prevent lengthy legal proceedings from delaying the essential rebuilding of the city. When the reading concludes, the crowd breaks into small groups discussing the implications. Some express relief at the promised speed of the process, while others worry about whether the judgments will be fair. For many, the question of who will bear the cost of rebuilding is literally a matter of financial life or death. You catch snippets of conversation as you move through the camp. Says they'll decide based on ability to pay, but we all know the judges favour the wealthy. Better than nothing. Without this, we'd be arguing in courts for years. What about those without leases, the poorest who rented by the week or month? This last comment gives you pause. It's true that the fire courts are designed to address disputes between property owners and their tenants with formal leases, but what of London's poorest residents? Those who lived in crowded tenements with no legal protection? Who will ensure they have homes in the rebuilt city? As you settle in for another night under the stars, these questions linger in your mind. The Great Fire has exposed not just the physical vulnerabilities of London, the wooden buildings, the narrow streets, the inadequate firefighting capabilities, but also its social ones. In rebuilding, will the city address both? Saturday morning brings a change in the weather, a light rain that dampens the ash and debris, bringing temporary relief from the dust that has choked the air since the fire. The rain also reveals something that had been partially hidden before, the acrid smell of the burned city, a chemical tang that catches in your throat and reminds you of the hazardous substances that went up in flames, lead, pitch, oils, and who knows what else. After a simple breakfast of bread and cheese, you decide to seek out Joshua Curtin, the bookseller whose livelihood was destroyed when St. Paul's Cathedral burned. You're curious about how he's faring, whether his despair has given way to any hope for the future. You find him not among the ruins as before, but at a small tavern that survived the fire by virtue of being just outside the western edge of the burned area. The Boar's Head is crowded with displaced Londoners seeking comfort in ale and company. Curtin sits alone in a corner, a half-empty tankard before him, staring into space. "May I join you?" you ask, approaching his table. He looks up, recognition dawning slowly. "If you wish," he says, gesturing to the empty chair across from him, "though I'm poor company today." You sit, signalling to a serving girl for your own drink. "How are you faring?" you ask, though the answer seems evident in his hollow eyes and unwashed appearance. Curtin takes a long drink before answering. "I've been better," he says simply. "My entire stock, gone. My shop, gone. 30 years of building a business, gone in a single night." He stares into his ale. "I'm too old to start again from nothing." "What will you do?" you ask gently. "I don't know," he admits. "I've been offered work by a printer in Southwark. His business survived being south of the river, but it would be as an assistant, not my own master." Pride and bitterness war in his voice. "At my age, to become someone's employee again? Better than starving, you suggest." He nods reluctantly. "True enough, and at least it's work I know." He takes another drink. "I've heard the king plans to rebuild St. Paul's, grander than before. Perhaps in time I might re-establish my shop nearby if I can save enough." There's a faint spark of hope in his words, though it's clearly struggling against despair. Unlike Viner with his financial reserves or Sybil with her practical skills, Curtin's entire worth was bound up in inventory that no longer exists. His path to recovery seems the steepest of the three. They say Christopher Wren may design the new cathedral you mention, trying to nurture that small spark of hope. It could be magnificent, a centerpiece for the rebuilt city. Wren, Curtin nods. "Yes, I've seen some of his work. A brilliant man." For the first time, there's genuine animation in his voice. "I sold his books on astronomy, before the fire. His Principles of Mathematical Learning was quite popular among the scholarly set." You realise that despite his current circumstances, Curtin is an educated man connected to London's intellectual life. This gives him resources beyond the material, knowledge, connections, reputation that might help him rebuild. Perhaps, you suggest, when St. Paul's rises again, it will need someone who understands books to help rebuild its library. Curtin considers this, a thoughtful expression replacing his earlier despair. That's not an unreasonable thought. I do know many of the scholars and clergy, and I have expertise in valuing and sourcing rare volumes. He straightens slightly in his chair. "I should speak with the Dean. Once things settle, he and I were on good terms." As your conversation continues, you notice a subtle but significant shift in Curtin's demeanour, the possibility of a future role, one that honours his knowledge and experience rather than reducing him to a mere assistant, has kindled something in him. It's a reminder that recovery requires not just physical rebuilding, but the restoration of purpose and dignity. When you eventually take your leave of Curtin, he seems more purposeful than before, mentioning plans to clean himself up and make inquiries about temporary lodgings closer to where the cathedral will be rebuilt. It's a small step, but an important one. Outside the tavern, the rain has stopped, leaving the air fresher than it's been in days. You decide to walk toward Whitehall Palace, curious about the governmental response to the disaster. As you approach, you see that the palace complex is bustling with activity. Messengers coming and going, carts being loaded with supplies, officials conferring in small groups. The royal government is clearly mobilising resources to address the crisis. Guards stand at the palace gates, but they're primarily occupied with directing the flow of people and vehicles rather than restricting access. This openness itself seems significant, a sign that the king wants to be seen responding actively to his subjects' needs. Near the gate, you notice a group of men in clerical garb speaking with a palace official. They appear to be parish priests from the burned areas, likely seeking assistance for their displaced congregations. The official listens attentively, making notes on a piece of parchment. Assure you that His Majesty is deeply concerned for the spiritual welfare of the people, the official is saying as you pass. Temporary places of worship will be established and plans for rebuilding the churches are already being discussed. Religion was central to life in 17th century London, with parish churches serving as community hubs as well as places of worship. The loss of 87 churches in the fire has created not just a spiritual vacuum but a social one as well, depriving neighbourhoods of their gathering places and administrative centres. As you continue past Whitehall toward Westminster, you notice people from all walks of life converging on the area. Some are clearly petitioners seeking assistance or information, while others appear to be offering services or resources to help with the recovery. The disaster has created a strange levelling effect, bringing together Londoners who might otherwise never interact. Near Westminster Abbey, which fortunately escaped the fire, you encounter a familiar face, Sir Robert Brooke, the Member of Parliament who intervened to protect the foreign man from false accusations. He's deep in conversation with several other gentlemen, but notices you and offers a nod of recognition. When his discussion concludes, he approaches you. "We meet again," he says. "Still observing the aftermath of our great calamity? Trying to understand it, you admit, and how people respond to such disaster. A worthy study," he nods. "I've seen the best and worst of human nature these past days. Great generosity alongside petty opportunism, remarkable courage in the face of loss, but also the search for scapegoats rather than solutions. Have there been more attacks on foreigners?" you ask, remembering the incident you witnessed. "Some," he sighs, "though the king has issued proclamations urging people not to molest strangers or Catholics based on unfounded rumours. Most Londoners are too occupied with survival to engage in witch hunts, thankfully." He glances around at the busy scene. "But there will always be those who prefer a simple villain to a complex truth. And what of the official investigation?" you inquire. "Have you determined how the fire started?" "We've taken testimony from the baker, Thomas Farriner, and his family. They insist the fire in their oven was properly extinguished before they retired." Brooke shrugs. "Whether that's true or merely self-protection, we may never know for certain, but there's no evidence of deliberate arson, despite the rumours." As Sir Robert is called away to another meeting, you reflect on how quickly conspiracy theories spread in times of crisis and how difficult they are to dispel once established. Even as an official investigation points to accidental causes, many Londoners will likely continue to believe that the Great Fire was the work of foreign agents or religious dissidents. The afternoon is advancing as you make your way back toward the burned district. The sun has emerged from behind the clouds, casting long shadows across the ruins. In this light, you can see more clearly the scale of what has been lost and what remains. For all its devastation, the fire didn't consume everything. The Tower of London still stands at the eastern edge of the city. The bridges across the Thames survive. Westminster to the west and Southwark to the south were spared. London is wounded, grievously so, but not destroyed entirely. As you walk, you notice more signs of recovery taking shape. Crews of workers clear streets of debris, making them passable again. Surveyors mark property lines with stakes and string. In some places, temporary structures are already being erected. Simple wooden frames covered with canvas or thatch, providing basic shelter until proper rebuilding can begin. Near what was once the Royal Exchange, you come across a fascinating sight. A large tent has been set up, and inside, merchants and traders conduct business much as they did before the fire. Deals are made, contracts signed, money changes hands. London's commercial heart, it seems, cannot be stilled even by catastrophe. "Impressive, isn't it?" says a voice beside you. You turn to find a well-dressed merchant watching the same scene. "3 days ago, this was just an idea. Now look, business continues." Life finds a way. You agree. "Indeed it does," the merchant nods, "though not always the same way as before. This disaster will ruin some and make the fortunes of others." He gestures toward the tent. "Already there are winners and losers emerging from the ashes." You think of the 3 Londoners whose stories you followed. Viner positioning himself to profit from rebuilding, Sybil adapting practically to immediate needs, Curtin struggling to find a path forward. Each represents a different possibility in the aftermath of disaster, a different response to having one's world turned upside down. As evening approaches once more, you find yourself drawn back to the refugee camp where you've spent recent nights. The atmosphere has changed subtly here too. There's still grief and uncertainty, but also more organisation, more purpose. Temporary shelters have improved. Food distribution is more efficient. Small communities have formed among the displaced, providing mutual support and sharing resources. You settle in for another night under the open sky, though you notice some people are now constructing more substantial shelters from salvaged materials. The initial shock is passing, and the long process of adaptation and rebuilding has begun. London will never be the same after the Great Fire, but perhaps it will eventually be something better, a city reborn from its own ashes like the legendary Phoenix. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder what the coming weeks and months will bring for London and its people. The challenges ahead are enormous, the suffering far from over. Yet there's also opportunity in this moment of transformation, a chance to create something new from the ruins of the old. In disaster's wake, possibilities emerge alongside hardships. The stars wheel overhead, constant and unchanging despite the chaos below. London has stood for centuries and will stand for centuries more, you're certain. Different, yes, shaped by fire and its aftermath, but enduring nonetheless. With this thought comforting your mind, you slip into dreams of a city reborn. A week has passed since the Great Fire was finally extinguished. The immediate crisis has ended, but now London faces a different challenge, the long, complex process of rebuilding an entire city from the ground up. You've remained in the refugee camp, drawn by some desire to witness this historic transformation and to follow the fates of the Londoners you've come to know. The morning air carries a chill that wasn't present before, a reminder that autumn is approaching. Soon, the thousands of people living in makeshift shelters will face the added hardship of cold weather. There's an increasing urgency in the air, a sense that temporary solutions must give way to more permanent ones before winter arrives. As you stir from your bedroll, you notice a group of officials moving through the camp, accompanied by clerks carrying stacks of parchment. They stop at each family group, asking questions and making notes. Curious, you approach as they finish with a family nearby. "What's happening?" you ask the father, who looks both relieved and concerned. "They're registering everyone who lost homes," he explains. "Taking names, occupations, where we lived before. They say it's to organise proper temporary housing before winter comes." This systematic approach is a marked improvement from the chaotic first days after the fire. The authorities have moved from emergency response to more methodical recovery planning. It's a sign that London is beginning to look beyond immediate survival toward longer-term reconstruction. After a simple breakfast, you decide to venture into the city again to see what progress has been made. The main streets have been largely cleared of debris now, making it easier to navigate through what was once a dense urban landscape. Teams of workers continue to sort through the ruins, salvaging usable materials and carting away the rest. Near what was once the Royal Exchange, you notice a large wooden structure being erected. It's clearly temporary, built of fresh timber with a canvas roof, but substantial enough to serve for months or even years. A sign identifies it as the Temporary Exchange, a placeholder for the financial heart of London until the permanent building can be rebuilt. you're struck by how quickly commercial activity is resuming. London's merchants and financiers cannot afford to suspend business for long, regardless of the physical destruction around them. Money must continue to flow if the city is to recover. This prompts you to seek out Robert Weiner again, curious about how London's financial community is adapting. You find him not amid the ruins of his former mansion, but at the Temporary Exchange, deep in conversation with several other well-dressed men. When he spots you, he excuses himself briefly to greet you. "Ah, my observant friend," he says with a thin smile. "Come to see commerce rising from the ashes?" "Something like that," you acknowledge. "Things seem to be moving quickly." "They must," Weiner replies, gesturing to the bustling activity around you. London is not merely a city of buildings, but a machine of commerce. If that machine stops turning for too long, the damage will far exceed what the fire caused. He leads you through the temporary structure, pointing out various groups engaged in different types of business. Here, merchants arrange for shipments of goods from abroad. There, insurers assess losses and negotiate compensation. In one corner, moneylenders confer with potential borrowers, setting terms for loans that will finance rebuilding. Many have lost everything, Weiner explains, but still possess their knowledge, their connections, their reputation. On these intangible assets, new fortunes will be built. He gives you an appraising look. Those who understand this are already securing their future. There's something almost predatory in his assessment, a reminder that disasters create opportunities for those positioned to exploit them. Yet you also recognize that this rapid resumption of business is essential for London's recovery. Without capital flowing, rebuilding would be impossible. What of those without such intangible assets, you ask? The labourers, the small shopkeepers? Weiner shrugs. Many will find employment in rebuilding. Wages for construction workers have already doubled due to demand. Others will adapt as they must. His tone suggests this is not his primary concern. The city will sort itself according to the natural laws of commerce. As you take your leave of Weiner, you reflect on his perspective. For him, the fire represents primarily an economic disruption and opportunity. The human suffering it caused is secondary, a regrettable but ultimately irrelevant side effect. You wonder how many of London's elite share this coldly practical view. Your thoughts turn to Sybil Tame, whose practical resilience offered such a contrast to Weiner's calculating approach. You make your way back toward Christ's Hospital, curious about how she's faring now that a week has passed. You find her not in the makeshift workshop in the courtyard, but in a small room within the school that appears to have been converted into more permanent working quarters. The space is cramped but orderly, with tools arranged neatly on a proper workbench and finished shoes lined up on a shelf. Sybil herself looks tidier than before, her hair covered with a clean cap, her apron unstained. She glances up as you enter, recognition registering on her face. "You again," she says, but there's no hostility in her tone. "Beginning to think you're writing a book about the fire and its victims." You smile at how close to the truth she's come, just interested in how people rebuild their lives after such destruction. Sybil sets down the leather she's working with and stretches her back. "Well, as you can see, I'm doing better than many. The school has given me this space until my old workshop can be rebuilt. Between the shoes I'm making for the orphans and commissions from staff, I've enough work to keep my hands busy." You notice that her daughters are absent. "And your children?" The older two have been taken on as kitchen helpers, paid positions now, not just working for our keep. The youngest has been accepted as a pupil. Pride shines briefly through her practical exterior. She has a quick mind, the teachers say, might make something more of herself than her mother did. "You seem to have made quite a good life," you observe. Sybil snorts softly. "I've survived, which is something, but a woman alone, raising 3 girls in this world." She shakes her head. "Every day is a battle, fire or no fire." Her candour is refreshing after Viner's cool calculation. Where he sees abstract economic forces, she experiences the daily reality of struggling to provide for her family in a society that offers few opportunities for women, especially widows. Have you heard about the rebuilding plans? You ask. They say the king wants to transform London completely. I've heard talk, Sybil acknowledges, grand avenues and classical buildings and all manner of fancies, but I'll believe it when I see it. She picks up her leather and all again. Men like to draw pretty pictures. Whether they match what gets built is another matter. Her scepticism is understandable. For ordinary Londoners like Sybil, grand architectural visions mean little compared to the immediate question of where they will live and work. The theoretical city taking shape on architects' drawing boards is far removed from her practical concerns. In any case, she continues, punching the awl through the leather with practiced precision, they can plan all they like, but people have rights to their property. My old landlord won't surrender his plot just because some architect wants to put a fancy boulevard through it. This touches on a fundamental tension in the rebuilding process between the desire for a completely redesigned city and the reality of existing property rights. Thousands of Londoners own or lease specific plots of land, and they expect to rebuild on those same plots, regardless of new street plans or building regulations. As you leave Sybil to her work, you ponder this conflict between vision and practicality, between the ideal city that could be built on a blank slate and the compromises necessary in a place with centuries of established ownership patterns. This leads your thoughts to Joshua Curtin, the bookseller whose livelihood was destroyed when St. Paul's Cathedral burned. When you last saw him, he was beginning to consider how he might rebuild his life by contributing his knowledge to the reconstruction of the cathedral's library. You wonder whether this nascent hope has developed further. You find Curtin not at the tavern where you last encountered him, but at a coffee house near Fleet Street that has become a gathering place for intellectuals and professionals displaced by the fire. These establishments, still relatively new to London, serve as informal clubs where news is exchanged, business conducted, and ideas debated. The coffee house is crowded and noisy, filled with the smell of the strong, bitter beverage and the sound of animated conversation. Curtin sits at a table with several other men engaged in what appears to be an intense discussion. His appearance has improved markedly. His clothes are clean, his face shaved, his eyes brighter than before. He notices you and waves you over, introducing you to his companions, a clergyman, an architect's assistant, and another bookseller whose shop survived the fire. We were just discussing the plans for the new St. Paul's, Curtin explains, making space for you at the table. Mr. Hook here works with Dr. Wren and has seen the preliminary sketches. The architect's assistant, a young man with ink-stained fingers, nods eagerly. It will be magnificent. Nothing like the old cathedral. Dr. Wren envisions a classical design with a great dome inspired by St. Peter's in Rome, but distinctly English in character. And what of the library? Curtin asks, his interest evident. That's still being determined, Hook admits, but there will certainly be one, and it will need to be stocked anew. All the books and manuscripts in the old cathedral were lost. The clergyman, introduced as Reverend Thompson, turns to Curtin, which is why your expertise would be invaluable, Joshua. Few in London know rare books as well as you do. You realise that Curtin has indeed pursued the idea you suggested, using his knowledge to help rebuild St. Paul's Library. The seed of hope you saw earlier has clearly taken root and begun to grow. I've spoken with the Dean, Curtin tells you when the conversation shifts to other topics. He remembers me from before the fire and values my knowledge of theological works. There's no formal position yet. Everything is still too unsettled, but he's indicated that when the time comes, I'll be considered. That's excellent news, you say, genuinely pleased for him. It's a direction at least, Curtin acknowledges, and in the meantime, Thompson has introduced me to several clergymen from parishes whose churches survived. They need books for their studies and services, and I've begun acting as an agent, sourcing volumes from printers and booksellers outside London. He smiles wryly. Not the business I had before, but it keeps bread on the table and makes use of my connections. You're struck by the transformation in Curtin's demeanour. Where before he seemed crushed by his losses, he now exhibits a quiet determination to rebuild his life in a new form. He may never recover his shop near St Paul's, but he's finding ways to apply his knowledge and experience in the changed landscape of post-fire London. As your conversation continues, the topic turns to the broader rebuilding efforts. Rumours and reports circulate through the coffee house. The King has approved preliminary plans for the new city layout. Building regulations will require brick or stone construction throughout the burned area. Specialised courts are being established to resolve property disputes. They've arrested a Frenchman for starting the fire, mentions one man at a nearby table, loud enough for your group to hear. A watchmaker named Hubert. They say he's confessed to the whole plot. This catches your attention, remembering Sir Robert Brooks' investigation that found the fire was accidental, starting in Farriner's bakery. Nonsense, says the clergyman at your table. The fire began in Pudding Lane, in the baker's house. Everyone knows that. This Frenchman claims he planted a firebomb, insists the other man, part of a Catholic conspiracy. Curtin frowns. I'm no friend to Catholics or Frenchmen, but that sounds like convenient scapegoating to me. The baker's story of an accidental fire seems far more plausible. You're impressed by Curtin's rational assessment, especially given the prevailing anti-Catholic and anti-French sentiment. Even in the midst of disaster, he maintains his intellectual integrity rather than succumbing to the comfort of blaming an easily targeted outsider. As afternoon turns to evening, you take your leave of Curtin and his companions, promising to visit again. The coffee house has been a refreshing space of reasonable discourse amid the chaos of rebuilding, a reminder that London's intellectual life continues despite the physical destruction of so many of its buildings. Outside, you notice that the days are growing shorter, another sign of autumn's approach. The sun casts long shadows across the burned district, where the outline of the old street pattern is becoming visible again as debris is cleared away. Here and there, markers have been placed indicating the planned width of rebuilt streets, significantly broader than before, you note. You decide to walk toward Pudding Lane, curious about the site where the Great Fire began. The area is much changed from when you last saw it. The ruins have been cleared away, revealing the bare ground where the bakery once stood. A simple wooden post marks the spot, though whether as a historical notation or a property boundary, you're not sure. As you stand contemplating this unremarkable place that became the starting point of such remarkable destruction, you notice a middle-aged man staring at the same spot with an expression of profound guilt. Something about his bearing suggests he might be Thomas Farriner himself, the baker in whose shop the fire began. Terrible thing, you say, by way of opening conversation. He glances at you, then back at the marked ground. Worst night of my life, he says quietly. Lost everything, my business, my home, nearly lost my daughter too. But you escaped, you observe. We did, all except the maid. She was too frightened to climb out the window. Regret weighs heavily in his voice. I shouldn't have left her, should have found some way to bring her out. You stand in silence for a moment, respecting his grief. Then, carefully, you ask, do you know what started it? Farriner's expression hardens slightly. I checked the ovens myself before bed. Everything was as it should be. He sounds like a man who has repeated this statement many times to investigators and neighbours, and perhaps to himself in the dark hours of the night. I don't know how it happened. Whether this is the truth or a story he's constructed to avoid blame, you can't tell. Perhaps he doesn't even know himself anymore, the actual events of that night having been overwritten by the story he needs to believe. They're saying a Frenchman did it, you mention, watching his reaction. Farriner's face remains carefully neutral. So I've heard. Hubert, his name is. He shrugs. If that's what they determine, who am I to question it? There's something evasive in his response that troubles you. Is Farriner simply relieved to have the blame shifted from himself, or was he actively involved in identifying Hubert as a scapegoat? You recall hearing that the Farriner family had testified against the Frenchman despite the questionable nature of his confession. Before you can probe further, Farriner excuses himself, saying he has business to attend to. As he walks away, you notice that despite his claimed losses, he's well-dressed and appears financially comfortable. Perhaps, like many others, he's already finding ways to re-establish himself in the aftermath of the disaster. The encounter leaves you with an uneasy feeling. Justice, it seems, may be another casualty of the Great Fire, sacrificed to the human need for simple explanations and identifiable villains. As evening settles over London, you make your way back toward the refugee camp that has been your temporary home. The camp itself has evolved over the past week, becoming more organised and substantial. Many families have constructed more permanent shelters using salvaged materials, creating a makeshift village on what was once open fields. You notice a group gathered around a public crier who is reading aloud from an official-looking document. Drawing closer, you realise it's a proclamation regarding the rebuilding of London. His Majesty's decree that all new buildings within the burned district shall be constructed of brick or stone with party walls of sufficient thickness to prevent the spread of future fires. The proclamation continues, outlining various regulations, houses of different heights depending on the width of the street, specific requirements for foundations and wall thickness, prohibitions against wooden ornamentation or overhanging upper stories. These building codes represent London's first comprehensive attempt to create a safer, more fire-resistant city. The medieval pattern of timber frame construction with jutting upper floors, which had allowed the fire to spread so rapidly, is being deliberately abandoned in favour of more modern, substantial buildings. The crowd listening to the proclamation responds with mixed reactions. Some nod approvingly at the safety measures, while others mutter about the increased cost of building with brick instead of timber. For many ordinary Londoners, these regulations will make rebuilding their homes significantly more expensive, potentially pushing them out of the city altogether. "How are we supposed to afford brick houses?" demands one man loudly. "We barely had enough for wooden ones." "Better to borrow and build safe than risk another fire," counters a woman near him. "Easy for the rich to say," the man retorts. "They can get loans. Who'll lend to the likes of us?" This exchange highlights another aspect of the rebuilding challenge: access to capital. Those with financial resources or connections can secure loans to rebuild according to the new standards. Those without may be forced to sell their property rights and seek homes elsewhere, unable to meet the cost of the improved construction. As darkness falls completely, you settle in for another night under the stars, reflecting on all you've observed during the day. The rebuilding of London is revealing social divisions that existed before the fire but have been amplified by its aftermath. The wealthy like Weiner are already positioning themselves to profit and enhance their standing. The resourceful middle class like Sybil and Curtin are finding ways to adapt, though with varying degrees of difficulty. But for the poorest Londoners, the path to recovery is far less clear. You think about the three individuals whose stories you've followed throughout this disaster: Weiner the banker, Sybil the shoemaker, and Curtin the bookseller. Each represents a different response to catastrophe, a different strategy for survival and recovery. Together they form a microcosm of London's broader experience, embodying the resilience, opportunism, despair, and determination that characterise the city's response to the Great Fire. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder what will become of them in the months and years ahead. Will Weiner's cold calculation yield the success he anticipates? Will Sybil maintain her practical resilience as she rebuilds her business? Will Curtin find a new purpose in helping to restore St. Paul's Library? Their stories, like London's, are still unfolding, shaped by both circumstance and character. The cool night air carries the scent of smoke still, though fainter now. Above, the stars shine as they have for centuries, indifferent to the human drama playing out below. London has stood for over a millennium, enduring invasions, plagues, civil wars, and now this devastating fire. Whatever shape it takes as it rebuilds, the city will continue, adapting and evolving with each challenge it faces. Tomorrow will bring new developments, new challenges, new stories. For now, rest comes, and with it dreams of a London reborn from the ashes of destruction. 2 weeks have passed since the Great Fire began. The initial shock has faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of recovery and rebuilding. You've remained in London, drawn by a desire to witness this historic transformation and to follow the fates of those you've come to know. This morning brings news that sends a chill through the refugee camps and coffee houses alike. Robert Hubert, the French watchmaker accused of starting the Great Fire, has been convicted of arson and sentenced to death by hanging. The trial was swift, based largely on Hubert's own confession and the testimony of witnesses, including the Fariner family. You hear the news at the coffee house where Curtin and his intellectual friends gather. The reaction is divided. Some express satisfaction that justice has been served, while others voice skepticism about Hubert's guilt. The man wasn't even in London when the fire began, argues one gentleman, a lawyer by profession. He arrived 2 days later on a Swedish ship. There are ship's records to prove it. Then why would he confess? Challenges another. Madness, perhaps, or torture, or simply the desire for notoriety, suggests the lawyer. It wouldn't be the first false confession in history. Curtin listens to the debate with a troubled expression. When the others have moved on to different topics, he confides in you quietly. I fear we're hanging a man to satisfy our need for vengeance rather than justice, he says. The fire was a terrible accident, made worse by dry conditions and poor building practices, but we humans prefer villains to circumstances. His words remind you of your encounter with Thomas Fariner, and his evasive response when asked about Hubert. You share this with Curtin, who nods grimly. Fariner has every reason to support another explanation for the fire, he observes. His carelessness, if that's what it was, destroyed half the city. That's a heavy burden to bear, perhaps too heavy for any conscience. The conversation leaves you unsettled. A reminder that even as London rebuilds physically, there are moral reckonings and miscarriages of justice occurring alongside the construction. Later that day, you witness something more hopeful, the ceremonial laying of the first foundation stone for a rebuilt church. St. Dunstan in the east, one of the 87 parish churches destroyed in the fire, is beginning its resurrection. The Bishop of London presides over the ceremony, blessing the site and the workers who will rebuild it. A substantial crowd has gathered to watch, including many who were parishioners before the fire. There's a palpable sense of emotion as the first stone is set in place. Grief for what was lost mingled with hope for what will rise in its place. You notice Sybil Tame among the onlookers, her 3 daughters beside her. When the ceremony concludes, you make your way through the crowd to greet her. I didn't take you for the church-going type, you remark, remembering her practical, unsentimental nature. She gives you a look that suggests you've made an incorrect assumption. Just because I don't have my head in the clouds doesn't mean I lack faith, she says. We attended St. Dunstan's before the fire. The girls were baptized here. She glances at the ceremonial stone, now adorned with flowers. Besides, churches are more than places of worship. They're where communities gather, where people mark the important moments of life. Her words remind you of the central role that parish churches played in 17th century London, not just religious institutions, but social hubs where births were registered, marriages celebrated, deaths mourned, and community bonds strengthened. Will it be the same, you wonder aloud? The new church, I mean. Sybil considers this thoughtfully. The building will be different, grander, they say, designed by one of the king's architects, but the people will be the same, those who survive and return. She looks around at the gathered crowd. That's what makes a church in the end. Not stones and mortar, but the congregation. There's wisdom in her perspective, a recognition that while buildings can be destroyed and rebuilt, the human connections they housed are both more fragile and more resilient. Some community bonds will have been severed permanently by the fire as people relocate or die. Others will endure and adapt to the new physical reality of the rebuilt city. As October progresses, the weather grows colder. The temporary shelters that sufficed in September become inadequate against autumn chills. The authorities, recognizing this, have begun constructing more substantial temporary housing in open areas around the city's edge. Hundreds of simple but sturdy cottages now stand in neat rows, providing better protection against the elements for those who lost their homes. Not everyone qualifies for these accommodations, however. Priority is given to families with children, to the elderly, and to those who can demonstrate that they owned or leased property within the burned district. Many single adults and those who were lodgers, rather than leaseholders, find themselves excluded, forced to seek shelter wherever they can or leave London altogether. You've managed to secure a small room in a partially damaged building near the edge of the burned area, trading labour for lodging. The arrangement gives you a more comfortable base from which to observe London's ongoing recovery and to check in periodically with the 3 individuals whose stories you've been following. One crisp morning, you encounter Robert Weiner in a surprising location, not at the temporary exchange or amid the ruins of his former mansion, but at a construction site where one of the first permanent new buildings is taking shape. He's deep in conversation with the master builder, examining plans spread out on a makeshift table. When he notices you, Weiner gestures you over. "Come to see the new London rising?" he asks, a note of pride in his voice. "Something like that," you agree, surveying the construction site. Workers swarm over the foundation like ants, laying brick and stone with practiced efficiency. This seems to be moving quickly. It's the first commercial building to begin construction in the burned district, Weiner explains. A company of merchants has pooled resources to build a central warehouse and trading floor. I'm one of the principal investors. "You're not rebuilding your own house first?" you ask, surprised. Weiner smiles thinly. "My temporary accommodations are adequate for now. This," he gestures to the construction, "is where the real opportunity lies. Those who establish commercial operations first will have an advantage that could last decades." His calculation is logical, if cold. While most Londoners prioritise rebuilding homes, Weiner focuses on commercial infrastructure, positioning himself at the centre of the revived economy. It's a strategy that will likely yield significant returns, even as it reveals his priorities. Besides, he adds, the King's building regulations require substantial construction, brick exteriors, proper foundations, thicker walls. That takes time and significant capital. Better to begin with commercial buildings that will generate income to fund residential construction later. As Weiner returns to his discussion with the builder, you reflect on how the disaster has reinforced existing social hierarchies. Those with capital, like Weiner, can adapt quickly to the new regulations and may even profit from the rebuilding. Those of modest means struggle to meet the higher construction standards, potentially losing their place in the city altogether. This thought leads you back to Joshua Curtin, the bookseller whose prospects seemed to be improving when you last saw him. You find him not at the coffee house this time, but at a small room he's rented near what remains of St. Paul's Cathedral. The space serves as both living quarters and a makeshift office, with stacks of books and papers arranged neatly on shelves and tables. Curtin greets you warmly, looking healthier and more purposeful than before. "You've caught me at a busy moment," he says, gesturing to the papers before him. "I'm cataloguing what will be needed for the cathedral library once rebuilding begins." "So you've secured a position?" you ask, pleased for him. "Not officially. Nothing is official yet with St. Paul's. The plans are still being debated." He shows you a sketch of a magnificent domed structure, clearly the work of Christopher Wren, but the Dean has commissioned me to prepare an inventory of essential theological and liturgical works that will need to be replaced. It's paid work, and it may lead to a permanent position once construction begins. The transformation in Curtin is remarkable. Where once he saw only devastating loss, he now perceives opportunity, not to profit as Viner does, but to apply his knowledge in service of rebuilding something meaningful. "And I've begun a small trade in books again," he adds, indicating several volumes on a nearby table. "Nothing like my shop before, but I saw specific works for clergymen and scholars. The demand for replacement books is substantial, with so many private libraries destroyed in the fire." "You seem content," you observe. Curtin considers this. "Not content exactly. I still mourn what was lost. My shop, my collection, the old St. Paul's that I knew and loved. But I've found purpose again, and that counts for much." He picks up one of the books, running his hand over its leather binding. "Books endure, even when buildings don't. The knowledge they contain can be preserved and passed on, even after fire has consumed the paper and ink of particular copies." There's a philosophical depth to Curtin that you hadn't fully appreciated before. His attachment to books goes beyond the commercial. He values them as vessels of knowledge and wisdom that transcend their physical form. This perspective has helped him adapt to his changed circumstances, finding meaning in preserving the content of books even when their original copies have been destroyed. As October turns to November, signs of winter's approach become unmistakable. Frost coats the ground in the mornings, and the breath of workers clouds in the cold air as they continue clearing debris and laying foundations. The pace of rebuilding has slowed somewhat with the colder weather, but it hasn't stopped. London's reconstruction continues, driven by necessity and determination. You find yourself walking along the Thames one grey afternoon, watching barges laden with building materials making their way upriver. The waterway has become even more vital than before, serving as the primary conduit for the brick, stone, and timber needed to rebuild the city. The river that once reflected the flames of destruction now facilitates the process of renewal. Near London Bridge, you encounter a familiar face, Sybil Tame, wrapped in a warm shawl against the chill, overseeing the unloading of what appears to be a shipment of leather. "A fortuitous meeting," she says when she spots you. "I was just thinking of our conversations about rebuilding. You seem to be doing well," you observe, noting the substantial leather shipment and Sybil's air of quiet confidence. "Better than expected," she acknowledges. "The school has contracted me to provide shoes for all their children, over 100 pairs, and with so many shoemakers having left London after the fire, there's no shortage of other work." She gestures to the leather being unloaded. "I've taken on 2 apprentices and rented a proper workshop near the school." "That's wonderful news," you say, genuinely pleased for her. "It's a start," Sybil says, practical as ever. "The rent is higher than before, everything is, with so much demand for the buildings that survived, but the work is steady and the pay is fair." She gives you a measured look. "And yourself, will you remain in London to see it rebuilt?" The question catches you slightly off guard. You've been so focused on observing others' experiences that you haven't fully considered your own plans. "For a while longer, at least," you reply. "There's something compelling about watching a city rebuild itself after such destruction." Sybil nods understandingly. "It's not something many generations witness. My grandmother used to tell stories of the last Great Plague, but even she never saw anything like this fire." She glances toward the burned district where new buildings are slowly beginning to rise. Whatever London becomes, it won't be what it was before. Better in some ways, perhaps, but different. Her words capture something essential about disaster and recovery, the impossibility of true restoration. The rebuilt London will not be the old city resurrected, but something new forged from its ashes, incorporating elements of the past while responding to new realities and possibilities. As you part ways with Sybil, promising to visit her new workshop soon, you reflect on the transformative power of catastrophe. The Great Fire, for all its destruction, has created openings for change that might never have existed otherwise. Streets can be widened, buildings improved, infrastructure modernized, even social patterns may shift as the city reconfigures itself physically. Yet this transformation comes at an enormous cost, not just in buildings destroyed and possessions lost, but in lives disrupted and communities scattered. The old woman who knew every neighbour on her street may find herself in an unfamiliar district among strangers. The shopkeeper, whose family served the same neighbourhood for generations, may be forced to start anew elsewhere. The web of relationships and memories that made London more than just a collection of buildings has been torn and will need to be rewoven in the rebuilt city. As evening approaches, you make your way to a tavern that survived the fire, a place frequented by builders and architects involved in the reconstruction. The conversation there centers on the practical challenges of rebuilding, the shortage of skilled masons, the rising price of brick, the difficulties of establishing proper property boundaries in the featureless expanse of the burned district. The surveyors are working street by street, explains one builder, warming his hands around a mug of ale, using old records and the testimony of property owners to mark out the boundaries. But it's slow work and disputed claims are common. And then there's the matter of the new street plan, adds another. The king wants wider streets, but that means taking land from existing properties. Who bears that cost? The fire courts are supposed to sort all that, says a third man. But they're overwhelmed with cases. It could be years before every dispute is resolved. These conversations highlight the immense complexity of rebuilding an entire city, not just the physical construction, but the legal, financial, and social dimensions as well. It's a process that will unfold over years, perhaps decades, with consequences that will shape London for centuries to come. As you sip your ale and listen to the builders' shop talk, you reflect on the three Londoners whose stories have intertwined with your own throughout this catastrophe. Vyner the banker, Sybil the shoemaker, and Curtin the bookseller. Each has found a way forward after the fire, adapting to changed circumstances according to their means and character. Vyner, with his wealth and connections, has positioned himself to profit from the reconstruction, focusing on commercial opportunities rather than immediate personal comfort. His approach is calculating and self-interested, yet it contributes to the essential economic recovery of the city. Sybil, practical and resilient, has leveraged her skills and reputation to re-establish her business, seizing the opportunity presented by reduced competition. Her focus remains on providing for her family and maintaining independence, goals that align with the broader rebuilding effort. Curtin, initially devastated by his losses, has found new purpose in contributing to the restoration of St. Paul's Library, applying his specialized knowledge in a different context. His recovery has been as much spiritual as material, centered on finding meaning amid destruction. Each represents a different face of London's resilience: financial, practical, and cultural. Together, they embody the complex process by which a city rebuilds not just its physical structure, but its economic, social, and intellectual life as well. As night falls and you make your way back to your temporary lodgings, you pass through areas where new construction has begun in earnest. The skeletal frames of buildings rise against the dark sky, promising a London reborn. There's something poignant yet hopeful in these incomplete structures, symbols of a city in transition, suspended between what was lost and what is yet to be created. the stars emerge above, the same stars that shone over London before the fire and will shine over it long after the rebuilt city has itself aged and changed. In their timeless light, the human drama of destruction and rebuilding seems both significant and fleeting. A chapter in the long story of a city that has endured for centuries and will continue to adapt and evolve long after those who rebuild it are gone. With this thought providing perspective, you settle in for the night, listening to the sounds of a city that, even in its damaged state, pulses with life and possibility. Tomorrow will bring new developments in London's recovery, new chapters in the stories of those rebuilding their lives from the ashes of disaster. Seasons have turned since the Great Fire first ignited in Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane. Winter has come and gone, and spring breathes new life into London. It's now May 1667, 8 months since the flames were finally extinguished, and the city bears little resemblance to either its pre-fire self or the wasteland of ash and rubble that followed the disaster. You've remained in London all this time, drawn by some desire to witness the full arc of destruction and rebirth. Your temporary lodgings have become semi-permanent, and you've found occasional work as a messenger and scribe, carrying information and documents between the various officials and committees involved in the rebuilding effort. This morning, you wake to birdsong filtering through your window. The scent of smoke, so pervasive in those first months, has finally faded, replaced by the smell of fresh mortar, cut wood, and the countless other odours of construction. As you step outside, the sound of hammering greets you, a constant percussion that begins at dawn and continues until dusk, the heartbeat of a city rebuilding itself. You decide to walk through the burned district, curious to see the progress that's been made since your last thorough exploration. The streets are busy with carts delivering building materials, labourers carrying tools, and surveyors marking boundaries. The once featureless expanse of ruins has been transformed into a vast construction site, with buildings in various stages of completion rising from the ashes. What strikes you most is the order emerging from chaos. The streets, though still recognisable in their general pattern, are noticeably wider than before. The buildings rising along them are more uniform, more substantial, brick and stone replacing the haphazard timber structures of old London. There's an intentionality to the reconstruction that wasn't present in the medieval city that grew organically over centuries. Near what was once the Royal Exchange, you pause to observe a ceremony taking place. A foundation stone is being laid for the new Exchange building, with dignitaries in fine clothes and wigs gathered to mark the occasion. Among them, you spot Robert Weiner, looking prosperous and self-satisfied as he converses with other wealthy merchants and bankers. After the ceremony concludes, Weiner notices you watching and approaches with a nod of recognition. "Still observing our Phoenix City?" he asks, gesturing to the construction around you. "It's remarkable how much has been accomplished," you reply. "And how much remains to be done," he adds. "The Exchange won't be completed for years yet. St. Paul's will take decades, but commerce cannot wait for buildings to be finished." He straightens his embroidered waistcoat with a subtle gesture of pride. "Our temporary arrangements have proven quite effective. Trade continues, money flows, life goes on. For some more than others," you observe, thinking of the many Londoners who haven't fared as well in the aftermath. Weiner acknowledges this with a slight inclination of his head. Indeed, those with resources and foresight have managed well enough. Others have struggled. There's no particular sympathy in his tone, merely an acknowledgement of what he sees as natural economic forces at work. London will emerge stronger for this culling, harsh though that may sound. The new city rising here will be more substantial, more organised, more befitting a great commercial power. His perspective remains coldly pragmatic, viewing the fire and its aftermath primarily through the lens of economic opportunity and development. Yet there's a kernel of truth in his assessment. The rebuilt London is indeed shaping up to be more modern, more fireproof, more deliberately planned than its predecessor. "And your own affairs?" you inquire. "I see you at the centre of things, as always." A thin smile crosses Viner's face. I've done well enough. My banking operations resumed within days of the fire, and I've secured significant interests in the new commercial buildings rising along Cheapside and Cornhill. He glances at the foundation stone just laid. When the exchange is completed, I'll have offices there as well. My personal residence is under construction in a more favourable location than before, closer to Westminster, away from the commercial bustle. Viner has not merely recovered from the fire, he has used it as an opportunity to enhance his position, leveraging his wealth and connections to emerge even more prosperous than before. It's a stark reminder of how disasters often widen existing inequalities rather than levelling them. As you take your leave of Viner, you reflect on how his story represents one face of London's recovery, the face of wealth, opportunity, and calculated self-interest. But it's far from the only story unfolding amid the reconstruction. Your thoughts turn to Sybil Tame, the shoemaker, whose practical resilience offered such a contrast to Viner's cool calculation. You make your way toward Christ's Hospital, curious about how she has fared in the months since you last saw her. You find Sybil not in the small room provided by the school, but in a proper workshop on a nearby street. The space is significantly larger than her previous accommodations, with multiple workbenches where apprentices, 2 young men and a girl you recognise as her oldest daughter, busy themselves with various stages of shoemaking. Sybil herself sits at the main bench inspecting a finished pair of shoes with a critical eye. She glances up as you enter, recognition dawning on her face. "Well, look who's still in London," she says, setting aside the shoes. "Thought you might have moved on by now." "There's still much to see," you reply, "and you've clearly been busy." Sybil gestures around the workshop with understated pride. "Can't complain, with half the shoemakers in London either dead from the plague 2 years back or gone after the fire. There's more than enough work for those of us who stayed." She nods toward her apprentices. "Had to take on help to keep up with orders." "Including your daughter," you observe. "Mary has a good hand for the work," Sybil says, a hint of maternal pride breaking through her practical exterior. "The middle one's still in the school kitchen. She prefers cooking to cobbling, and the youngest is still at her lessons, reads better than I ever could already." Sybil's story represents a different kind of recovery, not the calculated advancement of someone like Viner, but the practical adaptation of a skilled worker making the most of changed circumstances. She hasn't merely survived the disaster, she's found ways to improve her situation within it, expanding her business and securing better opportunities for her children. "And your living arrangements?" you ask, remembering the cramped dormitory she shared with her daughters in the immediate aftermath of the fire. "Got rooms above the shop now," she says, gesturing upward. "Nothing fancy, but private and warm enough. The rent's dear, but with the business doing well, we manage." She gives you an appraising look. "And yourself? Found a permanent place in our new London?" "Semi-permanent," you admit. "I've been documenting the rebuilding in various ways. It's as close as you can come to explaining your role as an observer of this historic transformation." Sybil nods, accepting this without further questions. "Well, they say it'll be years before everything's rebuilt. Decades for the churches and grand buildings. Plenty left to document, I'd wager." As you converse with Sybil about the changes in the neighbourhood and the progress of rebuilding, you're struck by her matter-of-fact acceptance of both disaster and recovery. Where Viner sees strategic advantage and Curtin experienced existential crisis, Sybil simply adapts to changing circumstances, finding practical paths forward without excessive reflection or calculation. Taking your leave of Sybil and her thriving workshop, you make your way towards St. Paul's, curious about the progress on the cathedral and eager to check in on Joshua Curtin, the bookseller whose fortunes seemed to be improving when you last saw him. The site of the old cathedral remains largely a cleared space, though preliminary work has begun on the foundations of its replacement. Christopher Wren's grand design has been approved, though with modifications from his original vision. The new St. Paul's will indeed have a magnificent dome, but the process of creating it will take decades to complete. Near the construction site, you find a small building that serves as an office for those involved in planning the cathedral's reconstruction. Inside, amid stacks of papers and architectural drawings, you discover Curtin engaged in conversation with a clergyman and an architect's assistant. Curtin brightens when he sees you, excusing himself to greet you warmly. "My friend the observer returns. Come, you must see what we're planning." He leads you to a table where an elaborate diagram is spread out. "This will be the library in the new cathedral. Modest to begin with, but designed to grow as our collection expands." The transformation in Curtin is remarkable. Gone is the despair that gripped him after losing his bookshop. In its place is enthusiasm for this new project that makes use of his knowledge and experience in a different context. "You've secured an official position then?" you ask. Curtin nods, a mixture of pride and humility in his expression. "I've been appointed assistant librarian for the new St. Paul's, a smaller role than I might have had in my own shop, but one with dignity and purpose." He gestures to the plans. "We're already collecting books, donations from private libraries, purchases from printers and booksellers throughout England and the continent. By the time the physical library is completed, we'll have a worthy collection to fill it." "And in the meantime?" you inquire. "We've secured temporary quarters near Fleet Street where we're cataloguing and storing the volumes as they arrive." Curtin smiles. "I've also maintained my small trade in books for scholars and clergymen. Between the two, I earn a modest living in Undis." For a comfortable room and decent meals, which is all a man of my age really requires. Curtin's recovery has been less dramatic than Viner's calculated advancement or Sybil's practical expansion, but in some ways it seems the most complete. He has found not just material stability, but renewed purpose and meaning, applying his specialized knowledge and service to an institution that will far outlast him. As evening approaches, you find yourself drawn to one of the coffee houses that have become central to London's intellectual and commercial life. These establishments, still relatively new to England, have flourished in the aftermath of the fire, providing spaces where news is exchanged, business conducted, and ideas debated. The coffee house is crowded and noisy, filled with the smell of the strong, bitter beverage and the sound of animated conversation. You find a seat at a table where several men are discussing the broader implications of London's reconstruction. "It's nothing less than the birth of a new London," declares one man, a physician by his dress. "Not just physically, but in governance and planning as well. For the first time, we're building according to rational principles rather than haphazard growth." Yet the street plan remains essentially medieval, counters another, an architect or surveyor by the looks of his ink-stained fingers. Wren and Evelyn wanted a complete redesign. Wide avenues, regular blocks, grand piazzas. What we're getting is the old London with slightly wider streets and better buildings. "And is that not for the best?" asks a third older man. "London is not Paris or Rome to be shaped by royal decree regardless of property rights. We're a nation of law and commerce, rebuilding in a way that respects both tradition and improvement." This debate captures the tension at the heart of London's reconstruction, between radical transformation and pragmatic adaptation, between visionary planning and respect for existing rights and patterns. The result is something of a compromise, a city improved but still recognizable, modernized but not completely reinvented. As the conversation continues, touching on everything from building regulations to the financing of public works, you reflect on how the Great Fire has catalyzed not just physical rebuilding, but intellectual engagement with questions of urban planning, public safety, and civic governance. The disaster has forced Londoners to think deliberately about what kind of city they want to create, rather than simply accepting what evolved organically over centuries. The following day, you decide to visit the monument, a tall column being constructed near the site where the Great Fire began. Designed by Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke, it will stand 202 feet tall, the exact distance from its location to the bakery on Pudding Lane, where the fire started. Though not yet completed, the column has already risen impressively, a physical commemoration of the disaster that transformed London. As you stand at the base of the monument gazing up at the workers on scaffolding above, you notice a small gathering nearby. A man is addressing the group, pointing out features of the column and explaining its significance. With a start, you recognise Thomas Fariner, the baker in whose shop the fire began. Curious, you join the edge of the group, listening as Fariner speaks. Tallest freestanding stone column in the world, they say it will be, he's explaining. A fitting memorial to London's greatest disaster and its remarkable recovery. There's something unsettling about hearing Fariner speak of the fire as if he were merely an informed citizen rather than its accidental originator. When the group disperses, you approach him, wondering if he'll remember your previous encounter. Recognition flickers in his eyes, followed by wariness. Ah, yes, we've met before, I think. At the site of your bakery, you confirm. Some months ago. Fariner nods cautiously. A terrible business, the fire, but London rises again, as you can see. He gestures to the construction visible in all directions. Indeed. You hesitate, then ask directly, do you ever think about the Frenchman, Hubert, the one who was executed? A shadow crosses Fariner's face. What's done is done, he says, his tone closing off further discussion. The courts found him guilty, based largely on your family's testimony, you observe quietly. Fariner's expression hardens. I've a new bakery to attend to, he says curtly. Good day to you. As he walks away, you're left with the uncomfortable knowledge that London's rebirth, for all its physical improvements and rational planning, carries with it an unresolved injustice. Robert Hubert, a mentally ill foreigner who couldn't possibly have started the fire, was hanged to satisfy the public's need for a scapegoat with the apparent complicity of the man actually responsible for the accident. This moral stain on London's recovery reminds you that human nature, with all its flaws and weaknesses, persists even as buildings are improved and streets widened. The new London rising from the ashes may be more fireproof in its construction, but it remains subject to the same human tendencies toward self-protection, scapegoating, and evasion of responsibility. Yet this is only one thread in the complex tapestry of London's rebuilding. For every moral failure, like the wrongful execution of Hubert, there are countless examples of courage, generosity, and determination, from King Charles II's personal involvement in firefighting to the thousands of ordinary Londoners who've worked tirelessly to restore their city. As summer approaches, bringing warmer weather and longer days, the pace of reconstruction accelerates. More buildings take shape each week, their brick and stone facades a stark contrast to the timber structures they replace. The wider streets create better airflow and more light, making the rebuilt areas feel more spacious and healthier than their cramped predecessors. 1 year after the fire, in September 1667, commemorations are held throughout London, marking both what was lost and what has been accomplished in 12 months of rebuilding. Churches hold special services, civic leaders give speeches, and ordinary Londoners gather to reflect on their collective experience of disaster and recovery. You attend one such gathering at the Guildhall, one of the few major buildings partially survived the fire. Though its roof was destroyed and its interior gutted, the hall has been sufficiently repaired to host this event, where the Lord Mayor and other officials address a crowd of citizens. London has faced its greatest trial and emerged stronger, declares the Lord Mayor, his voice echoing in the restored hall. Though much work remains, we have proven ourselves equal to the challenge. Our city rises again, improved and secured against such disaster in the future. There's truth in his words, though they smooth over the suffering and displacement that many Londoners continue to experience. The rebuilding has indeed been remarkable in its speed and scope, yet it has not benefited everyone equally. Some, like Viner, have prospered amid the reconstruction. Others, like Sybil, have adapted successfully to changed circumstances. Still others, like the poorest residents who lost marginal housing and lacked resources to rebuild, have been pushed out of the city altogether, their stories largely unrecorded in official narratives of recovery. As the commemorations continue over several days, you find yourself reflecting on what you've witnessed during this extraordinary year in London's history. The Great Fire, for all its destruction, created a unique opportunity for renewal, not just of buildings and streets, but of ideas about how a city should function and be governed. The new building regulations requiring brick and stone construction will make London less vulnerable to fire in the future. The wider streets will improve circulation of people, goods and air. The rebuilt churches and public buildings designed by visionaries like Christopher Wren will become architectural treasures admired for centuries to come. Beyond these physical improvements, the process of rebuilding has strengthened civic institutions and fostered innovation in areas from insurance to firefighting. The disaster revealed weaknesses in London's preparedness and governance, prompting reforms that will benefit future generations. In this sense, the fire has served as a painful but effective catalyst for necessary change. 2 years after the fire, in the autumn of 1668, you prepare to leave London, drawn to new horizons after witnessing the most dramatic chapter in the city's long history. Before departing, you make a final round of visits to the 3 Londoners whose stories have intertwined with your own throughout this catastrophe. You find Robert Winer at his new mansion near Westminster, a substantial stone building that reflects his enhanced status and wealth. He receives you in a richly appointed study, clearly pleased to display his prosperity. "So you're moving on," he observes when you explain your imminent departure. "London has taught you all it can." "I've seen what I came to see," you reply, "the destruction and the rebuilding." Winer nods thoughtfully. Few have witnessed such a complete cycle of devastation and renewal. London will continue this process for years yet, decades for the grandest buildings, but the essential pattern is established. He gestures to a map of the city on his wall where the rebuilt areas are marked in red. A more rational, more substantial city is emerging, one better suited to commerce and governance. As you take your leave of Viner, you reflect on how thoroughly he embodies a certain approach to disaster, seeing it primarily as an opportunity for advancement, focusing on systems and structures rather than human suffering. His perspective is limited, but not entirely wrong. The improved London rising from the ashes will indeed serve commerce and governance better than its medieval predecessor. Your next visit takes you to Sybil Thames' expanded workshop, now a hive of activity with multiple apprentices and journeymen working under her direction. Her business has continued to thrive, expanding beyond the school to serve merchants, professionals, and even some members of the gentry. "Off to see new places, are you?" she asks when you explain your plans. "Can't say I blame you. London's becoming a proper city again, but there's a whole world beyond." "And you?" you inquire. "Will you remain here?" "Where else would I go?" Sybil replies pragmatically. "The business is established, my daughter's settled. The oldest will be married next spring to a journeyman cordwainer with good prospects. The middle one has a position in a respectable household as an undercook, and the youngest—" A rare smile softens her features. "The school says she has a gift for letters. They're keeping her on as a pupil teacher." Zybil's story is one of practical success, not spectacular advancement like Viner's, but steady improvement through skill, determination, and adaptability. The disaster that might have ruined her instead became, through her own efforts, a turning point toward greater prosperity and security for herself and her children. Your final visit takes you to Joshua Curtin, now firmly established in his role as assistant librarian for the future St. Paul's Cathedral. You find him in the temporary library surrounded by books and manuscripts, a contented figure amid the literary treasures he helps preserve. "I shall miss our conversations," he tells you when you share news of your departure. You've been a witness to an extraordinary time in London's history and in my own life as well. How do you reflect on it all, you ask? The fire, the losses, the rebuilding. Curtin considers this thoughtfully. "I lost everything I had built over a lifetime," he says slowly. "My shop, my inventory, my independence as a businessman. For a time, I thought that loss would break me." He gestures to the books around him. "But in losing what I had, I found a different purpose, preserving knowledge for future generations through this library." He selects a volume from a nearby shelf, running his hand over its leather binding. Some of these books are the only surviving copies of their kind, rescued from other fires or disasters over the centuries. They remind me that preservation matters, that what we save from destruction becomes a gift to the future. His eyes meet yours with quiet intensity. Perhaps that's the meaning I've found in all this, that even in devastating loss, something valuable can be preserved and passed on. Curtin's philosophical perspective offers a fitting conclusion to your time in London. The Great Fire destroyed much, but it also created space for renewal and improvement. What emerges from the ashes will not be the same city that burned, but one that carries forward the best elements of its predecessor, while incorporating new ideas and approaches. As you make your final preparations to leave London, you climb Primrose Hill to the north of the city, seeking a panoramic view of what you've witnessed over these transformative years. From this vantage point, you can see the full extent of the burned district, now a landscape of construction with new buildings rising amid the scars of destruction. The Tower of London stands at the eastern edge, a reminder of the city's ancient foundations. The partially rebuilt St. Paul's marks the centre, its future dome still just an architect's vision. To the west, Westminster's spires remain untouched by the fire, a symbol of continuity amid change. And throughout the burned area, new structures emerge day by day, brick by brick, stone by stone, London remaking itself with deliberate purpose. The Great Fire of London changed the face of the city forever, destroying its medieval heart and forcing a rapid evolution toward more modern urban forms. Yet London's essential character, its commercial energy, its political significance, its cultural vitality survived the flames. The city that emerges from this disaster will continue to evolve for centuries to come, shaped by this moment of destruction and rebirth, but never defined solely by it. As the sun sets over this changing cityscape, casting long shadows from the new buildings and gilding the Thames with golden light, you reflect on what you've learned from witnessing London's trial by fire. Disasters reveal both the fragility of human constructions and the resilience of human communities. They expose weaknesses but also create opportunities for improvement. They bring suffering, but also inspire courage, ingenuity, and cooperation. The story of the Great Fire of London is not merely one of destruction and rebuilding, but of how people respond to catastrophe, some calculating advantage, others adapting practically, still others finding new purpose amid loss. It's a story of physical transformation, yes, but also of human experience in all its complexity. As darkness falls and stars appear above the city, you turn away from the view, ready for your own journey onward. London will continue its rebuilding without you as a witness, but you carry with you the memory of this extraordinary moment in its history, a time when destruction created possibility and an ancient city reinvented itself for a new age. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of the Great Fire, that endings can become beginnings, that devastation can lead to renewal, and that the human spirit, like London itself, possesses a remarkable capacity to rise from the ashes of disaster and build something new.